Welcome, everyone. What a joy and a pleasure. I think David Hinton is well known to Mountain Cloud. For lots of people online tonight, that's really great. And it's always wonderful to have just the energy and the Zendo. So just say a few words by way of welcome. David Hinton, prolific author, poet, translator. His writing grows out of ancient Chinese thought with a special emphasis on Daoism and Chan Buddhism as pathways into appreciating and investigating the mysterious fabric, or what David calls the single tissue of this life. And out of that, leading into deep ecological thinking. David has earned many awards, distinguished awards, and looking at his list of publications, the books, very prolific, too many to name. Pick up any one. The work on translation, so many volumes, or this amazing line of work that we're going to be tapping into a little bit more tonight, that is about Daoism and Chan and this sixth extinction that we're facing here on the planet. Just a word that last July, we were really so lucky to have David here virtually to talk about his latest book, his last book, which was this translation of the koan collection, The Blue Cliff Record. And in that conversation, it raised questions about translation, relationship of philosophy to language, and how the study of history and philosophy informs translation for David, this deep study. So rereading your work for tonight, I was struck by how often the word love shows up. So tonight we're going to look into that, primarily looking at Wild Earth, Wild Mind, that book. And it led me to give this conversation, which will be yours primarily, I certainly hope, a title, though: Poetry, Practice, and the Wild Ethics of Love. So welcome, David.
Thank you.
Yeah. And just to start, I'd like to ask if you would read one of your poems, this from the collection Desert.
I found it.
You found it?
Is it that one?
Yes.
Yeah, this one.
Yeah.
Okay. This is what it means to be human, they say. Tools, language, stories, perhaps. It seems so simple. And yet, what am I when the eye, the mirror deep eye, empties mind of everything but a storyless white-tailed hawk banking steeply into a wild pencil-thin thermal, wings buffeted as it spirals up and finally vanishes into desert sky.
So, reading that, the words human, I, mirror, and wild jump out. And I wondered if you might just start riffing a little on the question you ask in the poem, which is, what am I?
Oh. I think that I like it that the poem, I was reading it and thinking maybe it doesn't quite do what it's supposed to do, but it ends with sky, because I think I've written about how empty mind is well, I think for me, when you with empty mind, one place that it feels whole is looking at empty sky, because the same thing, there's emptiness out there and emptiness in here. And that's probably what that's about, because we say there are all these things that make us human, like technology and tools and language and storytelling. But under that is empty mind, which in a sense is not human. It's some I don't know what, it's what we are when the human is stripped away, I guess. I don't know if we're going to get to it, but I have a book coming out called, with a subtitle called Two Walks at the Edge of the Human. And that's sort of what I'm talking about, is like getting mind to the place where it's what's underneath the human, which is what we call empty mind. The thing that stays there as all the other stuff goes through. So I've been thinking about this lately, maybe for another book someday, I don't know. But, you have a lifetime of experience, and all these experiences happen, but they all go by, and we think, well, having experiences is what is self-realization, what makes us what we are, and in a sense that's true, but always under that, almost untouched by all of that experience, is this empty mind, untouched by the human, the tools, the technology, like I'm sitting here at Mary Ann's house down the road here and looking across the valley, and there's a table saw whining, and there's the drone of traffic and all of that human stuff. But under it, there's the ridgeline of the Jemez Mountains, and there's this empty sky, and there's empty mind. What the hawk kind of spirals up into. Is that a riff?
You write about, in Wild Earth, Wild Mind, Wild Earth, decentering that I, and how, well, you trace it somewhat historically, how we got into this,
Mm-hmm.
and then kind of unwind that by going into this empty sky, this wild mind. I wonder if that might be something to share with folks, how you're seeing this. Even however you want to get into it, like, you talk about the Paleolithic to the Neolithic and all of this, and then how we got into this sort of I, me, mine.
I, me, mine.
That's what.
Mine. Okay. I mean, that's like this history thing that I do. If you can. In a sense, when you meditate, you do this. You kind of, I think, we sort of getting back to this Paleolithic mind, and I think in the Paleolithic, there was no this kind of isolated ego that we all have, that we all inherit from the Western tradition, from Greek philosophy and Christianity, even if we're not philosophers or Christians. And I think that the where that this construct comes from is in the Paleolithic, there's probably no real separation between something like self or consciousness and the world. But with the Neolithic, when people started settling into farming villages and cultivating land, there was suddenly there was this breach between the human and the non-human, right? There's this human space, the village, the field, and then everything else. And in a sense, you're fighting against it. Once you become agricultural, you're in the Paleolithic. I haven't written about this, but I keep coming back to it. In the Paleolithic, they really can seem to think of existence as this like gifting thing, like the earth is just this giving you all this stuff and you're just taking it and you give back. It's all about giving. But once you become agricultural, it's like extractive. You have to go out and you're like extracting. You have to dig out fields and keep them separate from the wild so that you can get what you want if you want, so you can get your vegetables or your grains. So if that's one separation between the human and the non-human. And then I think a bigger separation, the more maybe more radical one in terms of consciousness happens when we start writing. Because when you start writing, you suddenly there's this sense that there's this internal realm that's permanent because you can write it, you write it down, it lasts, you can come back to it later and you can change it, or someone else can be in that conscious space somewhere else in some other time. Maybe I'm not explaining this very well, but so that's I think is the beginning of this sense that there's this self inside, separate from everything outside, and then it's somehow timeless. And then from that comes this idea of the spirit or the soul that Greeks and Christians in the West pick up on. In a sense, Greeks and Christians are just taking that. It's funny because it's the things that drove this transformation in human consciousness. It wasn't philosophy. It was just technology. It was just evolution of suddenly we start plowing the ground and it changes us. Suddenly we start writing and it completely changes our relation to the world and what consciousness is. It's kind of accidental. But that I think is the source of this kind of spirit self, this identity, this ego that we all inhabit now. And then the Greeks and the Christians kind of mythologized that and turned it into, Christians turned it into the spirit, and then that's part of a whole cosmology. It's kind of spirit with these dichotomies: spirit, matter, heaven, earth, et cetera, et cetera. And then it's kind of done. And then it's just this absolutely radical break between the human and in Christianity. We're almost aliens here on this planet, and our real home is in heaven someplace. And it's no wonder that facilitates a kind of instrumental, exploitative relation with the world. And you see it here. I live in Vermont, where you can really see it. There are Native Americans who did not have that. The Paleo Indians did not have this structure of consciousness, and the land was basically intact for 10,000 years. But when Europeans came with this whole different relationship, they had clear-cut Vermont. The entire state was clear-cut in a couple of decades, and that's it's a kind of philosophical thing. It's not just survival. It's not just utilitarian, practical. It's a philosophical difference, a different worldview, a different conception of self, relation of self and the world. Is that what you're talking about? Yeah.
Yeah, and then, you go deeply into this phrase you call wilding the mind, which is, or more simply, you talk about decentering, this sort of lodged, permanent sense of a separate self. But in the context of that phrase, wilding the mind.
Mm-hmm. And it's really just a question of looking at the reality of things, because, you know, in spite of all of the assumptions that really, no matter how hard we try to think outside of it or push outside of it, we really do inherit this this kind of spirit self from our culture, and it goes pretty deep. And you know, that's so much of what meditation is about. You know, it's interesting. Meditation in the East is probably quite different, because in China and ancient India, but you know, I guess we'll get to. I don't think of Chan as really Indian Buddhism. It's a different thing altogether. So I'll just talk about China. But in ancient China, there really wasn't that radical separation between self and world. That they hadn't gotten that far. They were agricultural, so they had that problem. They had written language, but the language wasn't like ours. It was pictographic. It was almost no grammar, so it was kind of wide open. At least in poetry, they rarely said I, whereas in our language, every time you have to say I all the time, right? Just grammatically. Every time you say I, that's the spirit self getting pounded into you. I completely lost my train of thought.
Wilding.
Yeah.
About.
So, in spite of, we have that built into us. However, if we stop and think about the reality of things, we know that, you know, the cosmos is evolving. The cosmos evolves suns, and there have been several generations of suns, and our sun is, I think, the third generation of suns. And it evolved planets around our star, and slowly it evolved life forms, and slowly it evolved higher life forms and consciousness in other life forms, and eventually in us. So consciousness is very simply, by definition, part of the natural, woven completely into the cosmos, into Earth. It's nothing other than that. Even this kind of alienated consciousness that we have now, this isolated self, it's all a natural part of the evolution of things. And we know that. And so when we sit here and look out, it's the consciousness, it's the cosmos looking at itself, or if we're thinking about the cosmos, it's the cosmos thinking about itself. It's kind of, I keep coming back to this because it's kind of mind-blowing, and I can never really get my head around it, that the cosmos, which we think of mostly as inert, opaque. Opaque is interesting. It's opaque everywhere except where consciousness is looking out. It's like consciousness is the place, the I is the place where the cosmos has evolved a way to look at itself, to be open to itself, where that opacity is open to itself. And that's kind of mind-blowing. And we're also the place where where consciousness evolved away. The cosmos evolved away. Not that it was like planning to, not like it has some divine intelligence. It's all just mineral process. Looking out at itself, a way to think about itself, and a way to feel itself. We feel it. We feel the moon rising over here, like when we were walking up just now, and the sun setting over there. I feel it over the ridgelines. And that's kind of mind-blowing. But to come back to the beginning of the question, that's how we know that we're completely woven into this world. I and I don't know if it's jumping ahead to one of your questions to come, because we talked about this a little bit this morning, but and that really changes how we feel about what's happening with the planet, realizing that the human that's destroying the planet is a completely natural phenomenon. It's not this weird outside aberration. And I marked a passage I can read from Wild Mind if you want about this, but it's not, the human isn't we tend to think, oh, the human is this unnatural, destructive force. And it seems that way because we're so alienated from the world. But in the end, if you actually look at that history I was just talking about, we're not. So us destroying the planet, oh, I know you said, where do you find hope or something? Us destroying the planet is no different than the asteroid that hit Mexico 66 million years ago, or the volcanoes that caused the earlier mass extinctions. We're like this completely natural force, and we're going to just sort of wash over this, and whatever happens is going to happen. And then how do you deal with it? You know, you kind of struggle against it, and that's the first thing to do. Will that work? Donald Trump's are elected, and things like that happen, and they keep happening. So.
One thought, and I'd love to hear you read, but you talk about one response to this ecological crisis then would be self-cultivation. I think that was a phrase you use.
Yeah, I mean, that's what Wild Mind sort of has two parts. The first is kind of like, how do we fix this or prevent it? And the second is, well, we're probably not going to realistically. Then what? And yeah, the first part is that whole thing I was saying is realizing we're completely a part of this. We're completely kindred to it. And that makes you want to, that's the condition for loving and protecting, instead of seeing it as just so much inert stuff to exploit, which is how it's been seen in the sort of post-Neolithic. Because as soon as the Neolithic happens, you've established this exploitative relation. Sort of Christianity, God saying, the God saying, here is the world. You should have people. You should have dominion over the world, et cetera, which is Genesis, and it's the sort of licensed for mass exploitation. What the Europeans brought to North America when they arrived was that idea. So the first sort of step is really realizing we are kindred and completely integrated into this, and therefore protect. You want to protect it. You want to, and that's a. I think that's a deep thing in Chan and ancient China. Ancient China is all about Taoist, and Chan practice is all about integrating consciousness into earth. That's what it's all about. And then so I'm sort of talking about, well, that comes here. That's come here in the last 75 years. But even before that, this movement has started with the Romantics, with people beginning to realize, Romantic poets, Thoreau, Wordsworth, beginning to realize how marvelous Earth is, which had not been a thing in Europe. What wilderness had been this terrible thing that you had to overcome, but with Wordsworth and Thoreau and just all the sort of Romantics and Alexander von Humboldt and all of these people in the end of the 18th century, beginning of the 19th century, the idea that Earth is sustaining and Earth is spiritually sustaining is that idea which we take for granted. Like we read Thoreau now and he seems kind of like, okay, yeah, that's how it is. That makes sense. But boy, when he did it, when Wordsworth did it, that was like completely a new idea. No one in Europe had ever thought of that way. So anyway, that kind of movement has been happening in the West too. So I kind of bring the two together, what's developed in the West and then the East that's done it more radically, did it more radically thousands of years ago. So there's that, and then that's idea of integration as a way to prevent this. But then when you sort of say, well, we can all sit here at Mountain Cloud, but Donald Trump's not gonna, doesn't change Trump and that whole world. Then you realize, okay, well, yes, that same integration gives us a way to understand sort of the inevitable unfolding. Why don't I just read this passage to you? The inevitable sixth extinction. So it's this first, I use the word unborn, which I think you all know, that's like an old Zen thing. And that's just, yes, we are completely woven into the tissue of reality, completely woven into Earth. It is, we're not, I mean, one way to think of us is we're born out of the world and we live our lives and then we sort of die back into it. That's one step past a kind of Christian thing that when we die, we're going to go to heaven. But one step beyond that is, no, we're never born out of it. We're always unborn. We're always completely woven into it. We are unborn through and through, wild mind, wholly integral to the generative existence tissue of wild earth. And accepting this engenders a new understanding of our unfolding eco-catastrophe. We can now see the sixth extinction as a completely natural event, human depredation no different from past causes of mass extinction, volcanoes, asteroids, glaciers, methane eruptions, gamma ray bursts. But they occurred so long ago and did not directly impact us or the world we know. We can see those past extinction events as the cosmos sees them, with that same indifference. We accept the massive species loss as simply part of the planet's inevitable and natural evolution. And from the unborn perspective, we can see today's mass extinction event the same way. Okay, listen, I'm going to jump. Perhaps the sixth extinction's most radical and profound teaching is that the sixth extinction is perfectly fine. That is to see with the utmost Daoist Chan clarity, the clarity of a boundless cosmos looking at itself, contemplating itself. In Daoist Chan understanding, it might even be called enlightenment, transformational enlightenment in the face of the devastating reality of our age. Existing wholly as your unborn self, your truest and most expansive identity that is the whole of Tao, ecosystem, wild earth, cosmos. And in that awakening, we move with the vast tranquility of the cosmos itself, even now as it unleashes this great vanishing. Tranquility, or even idleness, an ancient Chinese spiritual ideal of moving through everyday life with the same selfless spontaneity as the cosmos. And we learn a bottomless kind of laughter at the sheer thusness of things unfurling from their inherent nature in the only way they possibly can. Laughter at how beautiful it all is, beautiful, even if terribly perplexing and disheartening. Our truest self is the whole of this generative existence tissue in perpetual transformation, is indeed whatever new possibilities this great vanishing opens. And wherever the great vanishing leads is equally beautiful. It's a difficult insight, but also ravishing. It's there 2,300 years ago as Taoist Chan understanding emerged at the end of China's great cultural transformation. That's another story. When Zhuangzi described enlightened sages living wholly in this unborn, deep ecological perspective. And then this is a quote from Zhuangzi. For such people, birth and death change nothing. All heaven and earth could be churned over and falling apart, but for them, nothing would be lost. They inquire where nothing is false, and they aren't tossed about as things shift back and forth. They know the endless transformation of things follows its own inevitable nature, and they hold fast to the ancestral source. On loan from everything else, they'll soon be entrusted back to the one body, forgetting liver and gallbladder, abandoning ears and eyes. They'll continue on again, tumbling and twirling through a blur of endings and beginnings, wandering boundless and free through the selfless unfolding of things. So that's the kind of like the deep challenge, I think, of what we're facing. And maybe that's like I just dove into the darkest moment in this book, and then I shouldn't have done that. Maybe this is like last week's election coming out. I don't know. So sorry. Then like the book kind of claws its way out of that a little ways.
Beautiful writing. You two talk about, you use the word love over and over in this book.
It's funny you bring that up because I've been thinking recently that I don't do love enough in my books. And she starts talking, well, you talk so well about love. Oh, that's news to me. Okay.
I even, after our conversation this morning, I have the book on Kindle, and I went home and you can just search a word. And so I searched love.
It's true, it's in this book.
So what about the wild ethics of love?
Yeah, it's funny writing books because I write them and I don't, after they're done, I'm on to the next and the next. This is like 4 books or 5 books in my head, 4 or 5 or 6 books ago. And I don't remember what's in them. I don't remember anything. I don't feel like I'm the person who even wrote them. So it's funny to be asked questions about them. Anyway, about the ethics of love? Yeah.
Just if that strikes a bell.
Yeah. Well, that's the part that I was saying was that that's that first stage when you realize, no, we are completely unborn. We're completely woven into earth. It's everything. It's all kindred. And I start the book saying, we love all this stuff. Like we love the moon rising. We love. I start with. Can I read another? The first paragraph, because that's where I sort of just do this.
Yeah, that's right.
Just one paragraph. Sorry. Before intention and choice. Oh no, maybe it's 2. Before intention and choice, before ideas and understanding and everything we think we know about ourselves, we love this world around us. How can that be? How can we love all this when our cultural assumptions tell us in so many ways that we humans are fundamentally other than nature, and that nature's only real value is how it supports our well-being? There's no love in that. Doesn't love require kindred natures? And what is kinship with wild earth but wild mind? Maybe there's another paragraph, but maybe that's enough. So the idea is, in spite of what our culture tells us, we believe below thought, below assumptions, we love things. Like you look at the sunlight on a pinion and it's like kind of ravishing. Or I got up this morning and I looked out and I could look across the valley and there's the lights of the city like a galaxy, and over there a jagged ridgeline which I could barely see in the full moon setting. And it's just so stunning. Well, why do we respond that way? That's what the romantic poets were like realizing, well, I look at Mont Blanc and it just completely wipes me out. How is that? And that's what they kind of, at a deep philosophical level, that's what they struggled with. It's like, how can that be when we're supposed to, it's just supposed to be so much devilish stuff. And yet, if I watch what actually happens to me, that's where the idea of the sublime, it's sublime. It just ravishes me. As a matter of fact, underneath my assumptions, underneath European ideology and culture. So it's when you start getting past that and you feel that kinship, that's the sort of what's the phrase? The wild
ethics of love.
Wild ethics of love. That's where the ethics come from. If you love something, you want to protect it, right? If you love your family, your children, you do anything to protect them. So if everyone, if that was a cultural assumption, everything we did would be different. And that's what this book is really about, is like, you're not going to fix anything. People think there's technological fixes and Biden invests $1 trillion in technology, blah, 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 blah. You're not going to use technology to really fix this until you've changed assumptions. The assumption that it's just there for us to exploit. And for the moment, we think, well, maybe we need to back off a little bit or change how we're exploiting it so it will take care of us better. But it's the bedrock assumptions that have to change, or all the rest it might ameliorate things, it might slow things down a little, but it's not going to change it. So that's sort of what this is about, that idea of changing the assumptions to that wild ethics of love.
Yeah. That phrase, total kinship, comes up a couple times.
Yeah. I see you wanting to ask a question. I was going to say a little while ago that we really wanted this to be open to questions. In fact, our first idea about this was that it would just be questions, and then we decided we should try to have some kind of flow going, but questions should come in anytime you want. So, if that's okay with you.
You have to hold it close.
That idea of kinship that you talk about, E.O. Wilson, the biologist, uses the term biophilia. And I find, having a biologist kind of verify what we intuitively know somehow is really, really helpful. But it seems like, in your book, you're talking about this sort of progression that goes on, and the way that biophilia or that sense of kinship gets pushed down. And it seems like it's always there at the same time. Underneath the surface, I feel like it's not that far down, really. You go out in the woods for 5 minutes and you can feel that. And that seems like it's such a powerful force. And it really feels like there's a possibility there. I think you're sort of getting at this in the book, that wild mind is all these things. It's our destructive part, and it's our creative part, and it's the part of us that loves. But that part that loves has a real power, and it seems like it just comes up and it comes up and it comes up at the same time that things are being destroyed. So there's sort of this thing going on that's not, a trajectory into hell, but something very textured and nuanced. Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I was. Yeah, I think so too, and I think that's what historically I'm saying is that in terms of our history of Western culture, that thing came up with the Romantics.
Yeah.
That they looked at the Alps and it was like blew them away, and then they say, well, how is that? What does that mean? And then their way of understanding it was it kind of pantheism, that's kind of God is in the world. And then we've kind of moved past that. But that is, I think, what you're talking about. It's that wild mind that's just, it's there. It's like this guerrilla force that's just waiting to come out. And then the big question is has it come out quickly enough? And it certainly has developed. And then there's Thoreau, and then there's Whitman, and then there's, maybe existentialists, and then there's the environmental movement, and, the 60s, on and all this stuff is this cultural development of that, and it's been getting stronger and stronger and stronger to the point that everyone has to say they're an environmentalist now. When I was a kid, that was like, are you crazy? So it seems to be building force quickly. Is it? And then the question is it building force quickly enough? But I agree with you. It's like a beautiful thing, the idea that it's always there.
And there are millions and millions of people on the planet who never read Thoreau, but who live, they live on their farm or whatever.
Yeah.
And they know all about that. They don't need Thoreau to tell them.
Well, but cultural things like Thoreau, you don't have to read Thoreau to get Thoreau. It filters through the culture in all sorts of strange ways. They could just be sitting at dinner and someone could say something that their friend, and the friend of a friend of a friend had read Thoreau or had read, whoever. And I like that idea, the way culture is just sort of sifts around, and you think nobody reads Wordsworth. Who reads Wordsworth? But who reads Thoreau? And yet those ideas transformed the culture. They just sort of sifted through, kind of like, Christianity did. You don't have to read the Bible and go to Sunday school to inherit a lot of Christian stuff. It's just in the culture. Yeah.
I'd like to ask a question. For some reason, when you were talking about humans being kind of the fabric of the cosmos, not separate from it, this I, me, mine construct, that all made sense to me. But when you started talking about the inevitable unfolding, for some reason I heard tinges of like nihilism in there. Like, oh, it's just going to be the way it is. We can't do anything about it. Could you speak to that?
Yeah, that's the thing that I'm a pretty strict empiricist, and this book has been in my head, I think, since college in some sense. And like I said, it has two parts, and the first part is the ethics of wild love, sort of. But I don't, then there's this reality out there. That humans just aren't stopping, And I don't want to write a book and pretend that that's not true and pretend that the whole world is like this, because it's not. Well, that's in a sense that passage that I read, the long, boring passage, is okay. Well, this is gonna happen, and we can. How do you turn that in? Where's the self-realization in that? Because there's a self-realization in that wild ethics of love, and that is sitting, integrating mind, realizing mind as wild mind, empty mind as wild mind, integrated with wild earth. But you can also sort of do it with what you call the nihilistic view, and that is I talk about the sixth extinction becoming the great teacher because it's teaching us that we belong to it, to the earth, because we're feeling it, you know. It's causes grief, right? And then then that can almost become another practice. And is it nihilistic or just realistic? I don't know. You know, I live in the country in Vermont, so it's easy for me to ignore it. And sitting here in this room of more or less enlightened people, it's easy to ignore it. But go down on Cerrillos, or you know, go to Shanghai or Taipei where I lived, and it's just a fucking nightmare. You know, you just you know, you go out there and people are driving just giant trucks and you know, on and on. And no, it's not going to stop. The human race. Humanity just has this will to power. They need to shape the world. You know, they can't stop, you know. And I'm not optimistic it's going to stop. So then it's the thing that I was reading. It's like, then you realize, oh, well, we're just like the volcanoes. We're just like an asteroid. And then you become that passage from Zhuang's that I read. We're just like tumbling through this vanishing and reappearance and vanishing and reappearance. We can see it individually. You can see it, okay, well, I'm going to die. You know, my body dissolves out and becomes other bodies and on, you know, and that's that selfless tumbling through things Zhuang's is talking about. Well, that happens on the planetary scale too, where this little slice of diversity that we're living in, because the structure of diversity on the planet is constantly changing, right? It's gone through 5 mass extinctions, many smaller extinctions, many local mass extinctions, like North America had the local mass extinction of glaciation 15,000 years ago. So the planet's doing the same thing. It's like these structures of diversity are constantly changing, and right now they're changing fast. But there's always something, they always lead to something. They don't just end. You know, this sixth extinction isn't just going to end everything. I mean, there have been extinction events where there's been almost nothing left. And still, this incredible diversity we have right now, the re-speciation happens. This incredible diversity we have now has come. Like from the last extinction event was from the asteroid in Mexico, 66 million years ago. From that came mammals. Came us, primates, and yeah, you know, all the stuff we take for granted came out of a mass extinction event. So what happens when this mass extinction event's over? What's going to happen? What's going to come? And then that you just think, I belong to this whole. I belong not to just this moment in time. I belong to this whole process that's going on, this whole cosmological process. And then that's like Zhuangzi and Chan's biggest awakening is realizing that yourself is all of this and that you're just tumbling through all these transformations, the selfless transformations. And that's, if you can really get your head into that, that's mind-blowing. And that's I don't know that contemporary Zen talks about that much, but that's what old Chan is really, that's a really deep level of old Chan. And it comes right out of Zhuangzi and the Taoists. This idea that it isn't just empty mind, it isn't just silence. It's also action. It's also consciousness acting as the cosmos, consciousness as part of that living and dying, that vanishing, reappearing through generations, through, now we know, through extinction events, through species extinctions, through planetary extinctions, even solar extinctions. You know, it just goes on and on and on. Because our sun is, like I said, the 3rd generation, and in 5 or 10 billion years, it's gonna go, and the stuff that we are is gonna get scattered into space, and it's going to become other stars and other planets and other kinds of creatures, et cetera, et cetera.
There's a question.
Okay.
Rick, are you able to
Is that any
unmute?
help with nihilism? I don't know. It's a long spiel on nihilism.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. If the sixth extinction, which is the human cause, is natural because we're part of the natural world, and therefore all right, and sort of occasionally sort of awakening or realization of various things, I would ask how the value, the value of compassion, which is very central in Zen, relates to that, and the desire to minimize suffering, which you find in various other mammals, and not just mammals, compassion, fellow feeling. This seems to be in tension with your very long, wide view. And goes back to the love thing more, but I'm following up on your sixth extinction analysis.
I couldn't hear part of that. It was a little garbled, but I heard the word ahimsa in there. Is that right?
And
Did you hear that?
compassion.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I talk about ahimsa in this book. Yeah, there are intention. That's why it's like part one of the book and part two of the book. Part one is the ahimsa part, the wild ethics of love. And that's all that's the promise. That's what we want. Can the culture adopt that? And then if it can't, then it becomes the stuff, the more challenging relation to things that I've been talking about, maybe too much. So yeah, I don't know if I have anything more to say about that, except the things that I've been saying. But it's definitely a tension, and I think it's a tension that if you're thinking honestly and directly, it's a tension you live with and maybe tears you apart. I don't know.
So I have a question that goes back more toward the beginning of the question and answer. Took us through some of the changes and progression of changes, agriculture and writing, and but I didn't hear you talk about painting. And I'm painting goes back pretty far, and was also
idea.
caught up in all the romantic movement, et cetera. And just what are your thoughts about how painting fits into what we as humans are doing? I'm not.
No, I know. Yeah, there is the idea that the Paleolithic cave paintings were another way. I mean, in a sense, painting, it seems structurally is going to work kind of like writing, because there is this claim or idea that Paleolithic cave painting, and maybe you could say it about petroglyphs around here, was a place. I might take this back in a second. It was a place also where consciousness was separating itself out from the world. That's there was a poet named Clayton Eshelman who did a lot of work with the caves in France, and that's his big thing. It's it's the place consciousness creates itself as something separate from the earth. And that may be that's the first moment, and then writing kind of as an extension or an intensification of that. Because, when you create this world of writing or a visual world, it seems to point to the real world, right? If it's a realistic painting, you have the painting, say, of a cougar, or in the caves, it's a painting of some animal. then there's the painting, and it's, you know, it's like semiotics. It's like the sign and the signifier and signified. It's like pointing out at something. That's a breach, right? And before the painting, that breach wasn't there. And the same thing with language. Now I say cougar, and it's pointing at that thing out there. At least that's how Western language works. I don't think Chinese exactly works that way. So yeah, I mean, I think you're right. That probably is that way. And then there's like this other complication that's maybe I'll just leave aside. Anyway, that's a good point. Yeah. That's part of why I love going to look at petroglyphs around here, is like I feel like I can be back at that moment where it's a primordial relation of consciousness and earth.
Yeah, thank you. So there's like pieces of things from like different answers, things you've said that like you mentioned a lot how there's a difference between this coming from Western civilization and like Europeans coming and colonizing North America, and how like Eastern traditions also differ. And there's also the concept of like how culture can like weaves through everything, and so how like European Western thought has kind of like sent those tendrils out in a lot of ways. But the phrase that keeps coming up for me, partially because Kieran and I are leading a session on this soon, is a consciousness of domination and the consciousness of liberation. And so like that's coming up for me of like how this consciousness of domination over nature coming from Western thought. And it also isn't just like, I think I'm dominating over nature. It's also certain bodies, white bodies, dominating over other kinds of bodies. And so I'm also thinking of many cultures, the point you also brought up, like humanity moving towards power. And I also think of a lot of cultures that if it wasn't for this like tendrils of Western thought, would have gone a very different direction. So I'm not sure what the question quite is in there, but I don't know, any reflections you have on like on the consciousness of domination or liberation, or how
Tell me what
in.
you think about since you're going to be the teacher, now you can practice. Tell me about consciousness of liberation.
Yeah, I think a lot about, I mean, what you were talking about with emptiness and like the empty mind, and how like removing delusion and coming back to emptiness. I don't really have the answer to be really honest, but
because it was interesting to me that you were almost contrasting the two as if they're in relation to each other. Are they? Consciousness of domination and consciousness of liberation, are they related or opposites or something?
I think everything's related, so yeah, in some way.
But are they a dichotomy? Do they define each other somehow for you?
Maybe not.
Okay. Yeah, because I don't really know. I don't have an idea of what consciousness of liberation quite is, unless you're just talking about getting free of the self. Is that what you're sort of talking about? That kind of empty mind as liberation? Or are you talking about liberation as in political liberation of whoever, whatever? Yeah. Yeah.
May I? Yeah. So thank you for being here tonight and sharing your thoughts in person that people can access through your books. I like the way you began with the question of what is it to be human, or is that the way you phrased it? We recently had the visit of a friend who is writing a book on AI, and the underlying question of all of that is, what is it to be human? Because it seems that the AI revolution is somehow like a tidal wave that is sweeping over us, and it's bound to have some changes in the way we live as human beings. So that's one background question. But in that regard, earlier in your sharing, you also said that the Paleolithic mind is one that does not have the sense of separation from nature, which is also found in the Chinese and also, I would say, the Japanese cultures, East Asian cultures, in a way that we can learn from. But now we have been influenced by Western dominating thought, and unfortunately the Christian understanding of that, based on the stereotypical understanding of Genesis, has been a great culprit in that kind of thought of separation.
Yeah.
And so in that regard, what is your message to your readers? Not so much in the different things that you're writing in your books, which can be read there, but your underlying message through all of this that you'd like to share. And maybe that word that Valerie highlighted, love, has something to do with it. So now that we have so-called fallen from our pristine state of non-separation and we're now ruptured, where do we go from here? And what can you say to that, and what can you offer as a step forward, if I may?
I like that. I struggle. You know, it's such hard work making a book. I struggle and struggle and struggle and write. And then people ask questions and they think I can somehow spontaneously distill all of that into the essence. If I could do that, I wouldn't spend years writing the damn things. What's my underlying message? All of my books in 2 sentences. I don't know. I have no idea.
Anything that love has to do with it?
What's love got to do with it? What is that song? I don't know. That's some kind of pop song, right? What's love got to do with it? Yeah. Nothing. Isn't that the answer? What's love? Well, I think I write at the beginning of an introduction to something like Blue Cliff Record. There are no answers, only depths. Maybe that's an answer. I don't know. Yeah, I mean, I like the ethics of wild love. Like I keep saying, this book has the message that you're kind of asking for is part 1 of this book, and then part 2 is we can't control the world. You know, the world is so huge, and it's going where it's going. And then how do you manage that? How do you? Yeah, that part talks about. No, I keep going back to the dark side. I don't know why I keep doing that. So yeah, it's that wild ethics of love we've been talking about. If there's a message in this context, and that's what we can do.
Yeah.
What the world does is another matter, right?
At the end of your book, you write about this beautiful passage about the heart mind and the, signs for those, and
the what?
the
graphs.
The graphs, empty mind and mirror mind, unborn mind and wild mind. It's all equivalent to a full heart. Fundamentally, then, Chan opens us to love's most profound dimensions. That kinship in which we are emotionally entangled through and through with the world.
That's just where my mind was going, but then I said, I don't want to go to that dark place. But yeah, and so what that does is it opens us to feel what's going on, right? Because what we feel, yeah, you absolutely love it, but you also feel this wild grief and terror, because everything that you love is threatened. And that's when I talk about the 6th extinction as a kind of teacher, because it's like teaching us how much we belong, because we're feeling all this stuff. So there's a reason we're feeling all this. We're not detached. We're not separate.
That's the thin line between nihilism and that sense of.
Thank you. Yeah. 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 And it's, in a sense, it's a whole new emotional complex. I talk about Paleolithic hunter-gatherers must have had a very complex emotional thing that's strange to us, because they feel absolutely belonging to everything and absolutely in love with it, and yet they're killing it. And you know, when they kill a deer, they feel like they're killing their sister or their brother, their ancestor, or even themselves. And think of the emotional world you would live in that way. And I was saying, okay, well now, here we are facing the whole planet that way, with that same openness, if you can. And think of the emotional complex there, which is new. There's no word for it. It's this Paleolithic thing just blown up into maybe more you can bear if you can really open yourself to it. So I'm glad you helped me pass the nihilism. Sorry, we'll go.
I think you said somewhere towards the end of the book that actually we don't know. We don't know what's going to happen. You know, it's not like we're on this roller coaster to self-destruction. Maybe we are, but it's up in the air at this point. And that seems to me so essential to hold along with all the other stuff. It's just that we really don't know. It's so easy to go into, you know, nihilism or fake hope or whatever, you know, but to stay with that awareness that we don't know seems really important.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much, David. And I don't know if my question's even clear, but I was struck how you started your talk with speaking about the empty mind and the sky. And then all these other things about the destruction of the earth and all of this seem to come a little bit later. And I wonder, what's the relationship between those things? Because you also said this empty mind will never be destroyed since it is unborn. So is that, are you relating to the nothingness in Daoism, or where are you informed about what you understand by empty mind? And is it really possible for humans to have an empty mind?
I think I missed part of that. So wait, so what's, can you like try that again? Let me try to.
Yes, sure.
Is it possible to have an empty mind? Okay, I got that. But the stuff before, which is complicated.
Where does your understanding of the empty mind, what nourishes that? Because you say you come from the Taoist tradition. So is it the the nothingness in Taoism that informs that? Or is it the shunyata, Nagarjuna, or is it nirvana? What, because even when we say empty mind, we imply that we understand what that is, but do we really do that?
Well, I guess that's the aspiration, to understand it or experience it. Maybe in a sense you can't understand it. No, so what, I mean, for me it all comes from the ancient Chinese Taoists and Chan. And Chan in ancient China is not Buddhism, it's an extension of Taoism. People think of it as.
And so the Chinese, what would be the Chinese expression then that you translate as empty mind? Is it Kong or?
It's Kong.
Kong.
Yeah.
Emptiness.
Kong, but Kong is the same as U, really.
Right.
Yeah.
And so the U is in the Tao Te Ching is the beginning of heaven and earth, right? Is that what you're referring to?
It's U as in, do you know Chinese?
Yes.
You read ancient Chinese? U as in Wu Wei and
Exactly.
U Uxin
Yes.
and
And so the Tao Te Ching
Wuxiang.
speaks about the
So it's the same word. It's like when I say unborn, I translate U as absence. What absence is the tissue of reality seen whole as one generative tissue. It's not some mystical emptiness someplace that is the source of things. There's no metaphysics, absolutely no metaphysics in Daoism or Chan. So when you say, it's a magic word in Chinese because it's operates in China, in Taoist and Chan philosophy right at the base, and it comes back over and over and over. So you say, when I said unborn, we're completely woven into this. Well, that un is not born. That word not is u, which means not. So not born, okay, that's easy. But it also means absence, that the tissue of reality, the generative tissue of reality seen as one single tissue. This is kind of hard. So it's that tissue born. That is, that tissue keeps taking shapes like us and like all the trees and the planet or the cars. And, it's this constantly, if you think about reality, forget all your ideas about reality, and you just, look out at things and see what's there. One of the things you notice is that first you notice there's stuff. That's kind of amazing. If you've forgotten everything you know, there's stuff all around you. But the second thing you notice is the stuff's always changing. We don't think about that in the West, but that's just like this bedrock thing about the nature of reality, is that it's always changing. And that's fundamental for Taoists and Chan. And that's that undifferentiated generative tissue of reality constantly doing its thing. And that's U. That's U that's generating that stuff. So Wuxiang, no life unborn, is absence born. Uxin, no mind, is absence mind, is like when your mind, because if you meditate and you get down into consciousness and you see, thoughts are just kind of coming out of nowhere and vanishing into nowhere. It's that same emptiness. It's that same generative tissue. And that's when you're down to consciousness woven absolutely into things, because you realize consciousness is that generative tissue. And what's the other? Wu-wei is the other fundamental thing, and that's no action. Absence actions, that means moving as the cosmos moves. And that's sort of when I was talking about the sixth extinction and everything appearing and disappearing, and you're part of that. That's like moving as the cosmos. That's in a sense wu-wei, which is pretty challenging if you cast it in that such stark existential context.
David, I actually heard that as a word of hope. Anyway, we could go on, and
I'm sorry. It's like I am so hopelessly philosophical. I just go there, and it can kind of be perplexing or something. That's why, like I said, I try to lay this out so it's clear and makes sense that anyone can read it from the beginning of a book to the next book to the end of the book. And then I come here and it's just like random. I just do my best and struggle along. Sorry.
He wrote, "To see as a mirror in which the world comes alive as it is in and of itself, in all its thusness, beautiful and mysterious and intrinsically valuable, individual by individual."
Mm-hmm.
Do you think it would make sense? You have this poem that is like a bookend.
This one?
That just maybe would give us, instead of our chant of the four vows, we could hear egrets in your translation.
This is the first half of this book I know some of you have read it, but is called, this is the, the hopeful half. How a little, this is sort of meant half seriously, half in jest. How a little poem from ancient China could save the planet. And it's the idea that ancient Chinese poetry is all about, just like is essentially Chan practice. It's all about weaving us into the earth, and from that comes the kinship and the wild
Ethics of
wild ethics of love. Did I say that? Is that mine? I don't know. I don't know who said that. Anyway, so so this is just like a quintessential example of that kind of poetry that's all about just weaving us in. You'll see there's no self. It's all about, I guess I have to say this. So in empty mind, when you have an empty mind and you look at the world, you're just a mirror, right? There's no confusion. That we usually are just lost in our thoughts. But in empty mind, you're just a mirror. And whatever you see is you, right? Just structurally. So that's a kind of radical integration of you and the world. So that's what happens in this poem, although it doesn't say anything about that. It's just that the whole poem is that mirror deep clarity of empty mind consciousness. Egrets, robes of snow, crests of snow, and beaks of azure jade, they fish in shadowy streams. Then startling away into flight, they leave emerald mountains for lit distances. Pear blossoms, a treeful, tumble in the evening wind. The other great thing about that is it's kind of fragmentary, right? It's like, so you get the egrets and then suddenly there's another image, and it's like, in a sense, it has nothing to do with it. It's not trying, there's no logic. It's just empty mind mirroring whatever happens.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, all of us. That's right.